So let me see. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to cover today. Can everyone see the whole slide? Like the
Yes.
Zoom isn't in the way? Okay, because my Zoom's slightly in the way, but I think
That
that's
happens
just
to
me.
me. Sometimes you have to push it up.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Now you guys are all on the top. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. You a
So
little
yeah.
body language there.
So what we're
But
going to
it's good.
cover today is basically the role that nutrition plays, specifically in neurotransmitter production. I know that there's a lot of talk now about neurotransmitters not being like the root cause of conditions like depression and anxiety. Well, of course, there are tons of root causes of mental health conditions, but we cannot ignore neurotransmitters. And what I've found working clinically is that a lot of times people aren't getting foundational nutrients that we need for neurotransmitter synthesis. So that's what we're really going to cover today. And then we're going to talk about the nutrients and foods that supply adequate dietary intake for these specific nutrients. So what foods will you actually get these in? And then we're just going to go through some overall takeaways that people with depression or other mood disorders can focus on from a dietary perspective, or that you can help incorporate into people's lives from a dietary perspective. So we're going to get a little sciencey at first, but then we'll kind of go over broad spectrum of like, what does this actually mean when we look at like popular diets and what's helpful. Okay, so I'm not going to cover this too much. I think a lot of us are familiar with what neurotransmitters are. What I think is important to kind of go through is that neurotransmitters have both excitatory and inhibitory actions, and some of them exhibit both functions. But a lot of them are basically the synthesis of which involves simple and abundant precursors, including widely available amino acids with conversion steps, and a lot of nutrients are involved in these conversion steps. So that's what we're going to look at today. So the precise number of neurotransmitters haven't been identified, but more than 200 have. And a lot of times people aren't aware that there are a lot of compounds, chemicals that basically act as neurotransmitters in the body. So the common ones that most people are aware of are some of the ones we're going to talk about today, like serotonin, the monoamine, so dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, GABA, glycine. But peptides act as neurotransmitters, purines, nitric oxide acts as a neurotransmitter, which is super cool. We get nitric oxide and things like beets and stuff like that. And then also some phenylethylamines. So a lot of things that people refer to as like nootropics, these act as neurotransmitters as well. When it comes to depression, most neurotransmitters, including dopamine, GABA, and serotonin, are synthesized within the gut and in the brain. So most of the serotonin comes from the gut, where it behaves as these messengers. But regardless of where things are synthesized, we still need these nutrient cofactors. So studies have highlighted possible linkage between neurotransmitter dysfunction and many neurological and psychiatric disorders, including Parkinson's, depression, insomnia, anxiety, memory loss, schizophrenia, and personality disorders. So it's really declines in norepinephrine and serotonin, so dopamine and serotonin, that have been observed the most in depression. So those are the neurotransmitters that we're going to focus on discussing today. Okay, so here's just a really cool image that I love that kind of gives you an idea of what certain neurotransmitters are associated with. So dopamine, this is our this says pleasure. I think of it as more like reward. Serotonin is our mood. I think serotonin, we always think about serotonin as being the happiness neurotransmitter, but dopamine is equally involved in this because it's what gives us motivation, right? So I think if we don't have that, that can be problematic too. So we'll talk about kind of the characteristics that are associated with both of those. So catecholamines and depression. So catecholamines are dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, adrenaline. So dopamine, like I mentioned, I refer to it as the motivational neurotransmitter. This is pleasure, enthusiasm, cognition, awareness, reward, learning, decision-making, sleep control. And then norepinephrine and epinephrine, this is what increases our heart rate, blood flow, blood pressure, physical performance, triggers that fight or flight. A lot of people are always working on like natural medicine. How do we get out of that fight or flight mode? But we do need it. And if we don't have enough of it, then we can feel like depressed as well. So mood characteristics associated with low dopamine are low motivation, irritability, lack of confidence, and sluggish. So just kind of moving a little slower is something that's very common with low dopamine. And often low motivation doesn't just have to be motivation like, I'm not motivated to do this task. It could be like motivation to basically like follow through in certain ways, or to really even care about getting motivated to do anything about the lack of motivation. So that's what kind of ultimately leads to the moving slower, physically as well as mentally. What's important to know about dopamine is that it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier and therefore must be synthesized within the brain tissue. So basically, if you Google like dopamine foods, you're gonna find all these foods that say that they have dopamine on these like websites and lists. They do have dopamine, but this can't cross the blood-brain barrier. So there are foods that can increase dopamine, but this is through providing the precursors, not actually having foods that contain dopamine themselves, if that makes sense. So this is how dopamine is made. This is a cool little chart that I made, and you guys have access to these slides, so you'll have all of this that you can get, and I have a lot of this stuff in my educational content as well. So we're going to talk about some of these nutrients, starting with tyrosine. As you can see, that converts to L-DOPA. L-DOPA converts to dopamine, and some very common cofactors that are involved are vitamin B6, magnesium, folate, copper, vitamin C, all that good stuff. So we're going to talk about each of these. So these are the nutrients that matter for dopamine production. Tyrosine, amino acid, choline, that's kind of like a B vitamin. It's like a B vitamin cousin. Vitamin B6, vitamin C, folate, and then minerals, iron, magnesium, copper, zinc. Omega-3 fats we'll talk about in a little bit because these are in a conversion step, but omega-3 fats are really important for dopamine in general, like after it's synthesized, and we'll talk about those specifics. Okay, so let's get into tyrosine. So the production of dopamine is regulated by the amino acid tyrosine, which is fundamental in its formation. So therefore, we need to have adequate levels of this amino acid. So elevated brain tyrosine concentration stimulates catecholamine production and basically increasing the amount of protein ingested, whether it's acutely in a single meal. So whether this is just like in one meal a day that you're eating or chronically over several days, this ultimately raises brain tyrosine concentrations, and then this stimulates catecholamine synthesis, okay? So tyrosine is found in all protein-rich foods. It's not a particular like hard amino acid to get, but if you're not eating a lot of or enough protein, then it could be problematic. So basically it's found in all protein-rich foods. So poultry, red meat, seafood, eggs, but also plant foods like legumes, soy, dairy products. So the takeaway with tyrosine is consuming adequate amounts of protein, and then you should be getting adequate amounts of tyrosine. And then let's go to serotonin. So serotonin is an important neurotransmitter in the brain, and this is associated with mood, appetite, social behavior, sex drive, sleep, and gastrointestinal mobility. So oftentimes when I work with people that have really severe digestive disorders, or really any digestive disorders, digestive cases generally go hand in hand with like depression and mood disorders for this reason, because they're so correlated. So mood characteristics associated with this is going to be lack of joy, interest, depression, anxiety, worry, fear. Feelings of overwhelm is something I see a lot. SAD is seasonal affective disorder. And then insomnia as well, because serotonin is the precursor to melatonin. And so if we don't have enough serotonin or the amino acids to make serotonin, then a lot of times we don't have melatonin either. Here's serotonin synthesis. So this starts with, we talked about L-tyrosine before, this starts with tryptophan. that goes to 5-HTP. So 5-HTP is something that, you know, a lot of you might be familiar with. That's a supplement that people take for depression. This is why, because this is a further step along in serotonin synthesis if people have issues converting one thing to the next. I think people could start with taking L-tryptophan. We could talk about supplements later if that's something we want to talk about. But basically, that's why people might take 5-HTP. But as you can see here, it starts with tryptophan, moves to 5-HTP, serotonin, then melatonin. A lot of the same nutrient cofactors, right? Magnesium, B6, some minerals. So the ones that really matter for serotonin synthesis are tryptophan, carbohydrates, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Carbohydrates is so fun, right? Because everyone has a different opinion on carbs. They're awful. It's not good for your mood. They're great. We'll talk about that. It's not a one size fits all, but carbohydrates are important for tryptophan. We'll talk about why. Vitamin C, vitamin D, B3, B6, B9, B12. So lots of B vitamins and then some minerals once again. Okay. So let's talk about tryptophan for a minute. So the synthesis of serotonin depends upon the bioavailability of tryptophan. Just like dopamine, serotonin cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, but tryptophan can if it's sufficient in quantities relative to other amino acids. So basically, there's a lot of debate with tryptophan because tryptophan competes with other amino acids for absorption. And therefore, when we have like just an abundance of amino acids, a lot of times tryptophan loses. So a lot of people are like, will eating more tryptophan actually even help? It does, because the more we have in the amino acid pool in general, like we were just talking about, whether it's in one meal or over the course of several days, the more tryptophan that we actually have to pull from. So a diet high in protein increases the pool of tryptophan available, and then carbohydrates can increase the amount of free unbound tryptophan, which then crosses the blood-brain barrier. So basically, carbohydrates help tryptophan cross the blood-brain barrier, and that's why carbohydrates are important for serotonin synthesis. If we don't have enough carbohydrates, then it doesn't mean that we can't have tryptophan cross the blood-brain barrier, but carbohydrates help this become much more efficient. Okay, so high tryptophan foods compared to other amino acids. So when we're talking about, okay, if we want to get more tryptophan and have a bigger chance of getting the tryptophan into our diet, some of the foods that are higher, if we look at their amino acid profile that are higher in tryptophan compared to other amino acids, this is going to be poultry, seafood, egg whites, and pumpkin seeds. I put this on here. This is just really interesting to know. So glyphosate actually inhibits a pathway for tryptophan production and the production of amino acids in plants. So basically, this has been shown to reduce the levels of nutrients in plants and therefore limit their bioavailability to humans that consume them. So when we talk about one more reason as to why, like, you know, it's good to try and get foods that don't have glyphosate on them. Like, this is another reason they're not going to have some of those amino acids that we want. And this is also why animal proteins are a higher source of a lot of these amino acids, because they're not as normally sprayed with glyphosate like plants and crops are. So the tryptophan takeaway is consuming adequate amounts of protein along with complex carbohydrates or, you know, unprocessed carbohydrates. Because if we do just eat a bunch of processed carbs, that's going to throw off our blood sugar and give us other issues, and that's not good for our mood. So we definitely still want to have like complex carbohydrates, and if anyone has questions about that, then please put it in the chat. Okay. So now that we kind of went through some of those foundational amino acids, I want to talk about, there's like 4 or so nutrients that I just want to cover because they're very common cofactors in these processes that I just showed you. And these tend to be the nutrients that I see the most as being deficiencies for people, and you'll understand why. So vitamin B6, a cofactor for dopamine and serotonin synthesis, the RDA is 1.3 to 2 milligrams. Best food sources of this are chickpeas, beef liver, tuna, salmon, poultry, beef, banana, pistachios. The best source is chickpeas. You'll see here, so the RDA is only 1.3 to 2 milligrams, but if we look at this chart here, this is our highest sources of B6. And as you can see here, it's not as easy as you might think to get enough B6. So let's say that we're trying to get 2 milligrams, because RDA is low in general, and that's just a whole nother topic. But let's say we're trying to get 2 milligrams. Okay, so you eat a can of chickpeas. I personally can't eat a can of chickpeas. That would make me way too bloated. Like, I don't tolerate like chickpeas that well. I could maybe have like a half a cup of chickpeas, but a cup, that's a lot, right? So I'm like, okay, I got like a half a cup of chickpeas. So let's see, like tuna fish, yellow. Someone also named Jess just entered the waiting room. Hopefully they're real and not fake Jess. Fingers crossed. So okay, so I have a half a cup of chickpeas. Maybe I have some tuna that puts me at like, or salmon that puts me at like a 1, right? Maybe I eat something like beef liver a few times a week. But as you can see, like some of these foods aren't super common things that people eat every day. So if you're not having chickpeas or beef liver or tuna, then, you're probably not going to get enough B6 just from eating a few ounces of chicken breast every day, right? So that's why sometimes like this can be a very common nutrient deficiency that I see quite often if people aren't putting intentionality into it, or they might, just need more for certain reasons. Vitamin C. Vitamin C is something that we think is incredibly abundant, cofactor for dopamine and serotonin synthesis. The RDA is 75 to 90 milligrams. The issue with this is that the Linus Pauling Institute actually recommends 400 milligrams for adults because the amount of physiological processes that require vitamin C far exceeds the RDA. And because of this, they recommend 400 because the interesting thing about vitamin C, as you'll see here, is that we only absorb, I thought I had a slide on this.
Buy some cover art. So each magazine has a.
Everyone, can you
Mute
mute your
yourself.
screen? My
Well,
teacher
mute
has a
yourself.
presentation for you guys.
Mute.
Can you spotlight my video?
Mute.
I'll make some Desmos calculator.
Hold on.
But these people in the Zoom meeting have to attend.
I removed him.
Good job. All right.
Okay. We'll see if he might re-enter. So basically, what was I talking about? Oh, the vitamin C. Okay, so the interesting thing about vitamin C is that we only absorb a few hundred milligrams of vitamin C at once. So oftentimes when we think about vitamin C and we're taking like, something that meets the RDA, whether it's citrus fruit, strawberries, bell pepper, etc., we're only going to get like 200 milligrams of it. That's about how much that we absorb. So vitamin C is something that is better off broken up throughout the day, or if you take a multivitamin, you'd have one that's 2 capsules instead of 1 a day, because we only absorb a few hundred milligrams of vitamin C at once. So if you're taking like a 1,000 milligram vitamin C for immune health or something, you're better off getting a lower dose and taking it several times throughout the day, because you're just going to pee the rest of it out. That's how vitamin C works. So I think it's important to talk about because a lot of people don't realize that. And we really need to be getting more than the RDA. So Linus Pauling recommends 400 for all adults because there's different genetic factors that influence vitamin C uptake. So I might absorb 200 at once. You might only absorb like 100 or 150. So the goal is 400 for all adults for that reason. So I gave you some examples here of what that would look like from food. So, 1 kiwi fruit would meet the RDA for vitamin C, but in reality, if we were trying to get 400, then we would need also some strawberries and some bell peppers and some broccoli as well. Okay. Folate. So folate is a cofactor for dopamine and serotonin synthesis. The RDA for both men and women is 400 micrograms. The reason why folate is so fortified in our foods, like folic acid, is because people do not get enough folate. And even if you're someone that eats lots of leafy greens, like I've done this, I should add this to the slides, like where I like tracked my food for a whole day, and I still don't meet like certain needs of things, of folate, for example, without like, you know, taking a multi or something like that. Or if I have like beef liver, you know? So basically, food sources of this are liver, leafy greens, lentils, beans, green veggies, avocados. It's just that it's not in very high amounts, as you can see here on this chart, okay? So like beef liver, we get a few hundred, spinach, we get a little over 100. And then, you know, these fortified cereals, we get more for that reason. But if we're relying on folate from like we're Whole Foods, we're like eating all these leafy greens, you know, we're probably just not going to meet that amount every single day. So it's an important nutrient to recognize because folate is very involved in the pathophysiology of depression. And if people are really struggling with it, they likely probably will need some kind of supplementation. And then the last one that we're going to talk about is magnesium. Magnesium is involved in like over 300 enzymatic like functions in the body. It's a cofactor for dopamine, serotonin synthesis, as well as GABA, which is our calming and inhibitory neurotransmitter that helps us feel chill and at peace. The RDA is 420. There's a lot of studies that indicate that our magnesium needs are likely so much higher because of the amount of stress that we're under these days. We actually like burn through magnesium stores when we're stressed. And this could be physically or psychologically. And then there are so many other factors that influence magnesium bioavailability. So basically, if we have certain health conditions, we uptake more magnesium. People who are insulin resistant use more magnesium. If you're on certain medications, it depletes magnesium. So there's a lot of drug nutrient interactions with magnesium where magnesium is depleted. And then there's a lot of chronic health conditions where magnesium your body just utilizes so much more of it. So we likely need more. Food sources are nuts and seeds, leafy greens, seafood, whole grains, avocado, banana, chocolate. Oh, and in all of these, I didn't even go over, I put like the best source on here. This is my favorite source of this food. Pumpkin seeds is one of my favorite foods in general, but it's a really good source of magnesium. So 420, as you can see here, pumpkin seeds is highest source. Chia seeds is a decent source. And then all of these kind of random foods that have magnesium, they're not that high, right? So it's like, oh, we'd have to have like a cup of soy milk or, you know, quite a bit of cashews, things like that. So if you can try and get some pumpkin seeds into your life on a daily basis, like it's a really good thing to do and such an easy thing to include. Okay. I want to talk about omega-3 fats. I told you that omegas were really important for dopamine and serotonin. So omegas are really important for neurotransmitters in general. So they increase the actual production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. And then they help enhance neurotransmitter release from brain cells, which makes them more available for us to use from the brain. And then they improve neurotransmitter receptor function, which are like the proteins that receive the signaling. So basically, they're very involved in the communication pathways. And we know a lot of this because of the research that's done on omega-3 fats for Parkinson's disease. So basically, Parkinson's disease is a disease characterized by a lack of dopamine. So there's a lot of research on omegas and that. And basically, dietary deficiencies of omegas lower levels of dopamine, and they actually increase the breakdown of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. And then omega-3 deficiency also results in decreased tyrosine hydroxylase, and that's basically the enzyme It's involved in the pathway of converting tyrosine to all these things that then create dopamine, like we were just talking about. And then on the other hand, supplementation with omega-3 fats has been shown to increase dopamine levels and the receptor bindings and lower MAO activity in the prefrontal cortex. MAO is an enzyme that clears neurotransmitters from the brain. So if anyone here remembers the first type of antidepressant developed, it was actually, they were MAO enzyme inhibitors. They're not used a lot anymore because there's a ton of side effects. A lot of it has to do with like nutrient interaction. So if you're on an MAO inhibitor, you can't have like high, certain foods that have high like compounds in them. Is it tyrosine? I can't recall, but basically they're not used anymore. So, but there are a lot of natural compounds that can lower MAO activity. And so omega-3 fats is something that helps with that as well, because if we don't have enough dopamine, we don't want to be like clearing out neurotransmitters from the brain. We obviously don't want those to be that high, which is why we have that. But so the best sources of omega are going to be fatty fish. And then if you, for some reason, don't eat meat, like let's say you're a vegan, you really need to get algae. I can do a whole different presentation sometimes on omega-3 fats. And I should have put this in here. There's a lot of conversion steps. So when we talk about foods that are omegas that are ALA, so this is foods like flax, chia, etc. These foods need to be converted into EPA and DHA, and there's a ton of conversion steps in between here. So you end up getting like, I don't know, like a 20-to-1, a 30-to-1 conversion. It's not very good. There's genetic factors that influence this conversion, and it's lower in males than it is in females. So it's just not a good thing to rely on. And oftentimes with mood disorders, it's very common to see that omega-3 fatty acid intake is very low. So that is something that I see quite frequently. My point is that the takeaway is that if someone is struggling with depression or mood symptoms, then they really need direct sources of EPA and DHA. They cannot be like, oh, I'm just going to eat some flax and chia. If they're a vegan, they need to be taking algae if they're not going to be doing fish oil or something. And just a clinical side note on algae. I was talking to someone the other day, and he was saying that he thinks that algae just doesn't work because when he sees people on algae and he tests their omegas, it's lower. I think it could be because when I look at algae supplements, the EPA and DHA levels, just milligram dosing, is so much lower than an omega-3 fish oil supplement. So the point is that there might just be not enough, if that makes sense. You might just need to take a higher dose, and the dose isn't relative to the dose on the fish oil supplements. Okay. And let's talk about carbs. Carbs are so much fun. So carbohydrates, we talked about how carbs are important for tryptophan. Carbohydrate intake should really be personalized based upon blood sugar, as dysglycemia is a huge underlying cause of mood swings and disturbances. Okay, so if someone has insulin resistance and they're having like blood sugar crashes throughout the day, they're having hyperglycemia, they're having hypoglycemia, they can have mood disturbances like depression and anxiety. So for someone like that, a low carb diet is probably going to make them feel amazing. And that's why it might work for some people. There are a lot of low carb diets that are very trending right now for certain psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, keto for schizophrenia. There's some evidence to show that diets high in saturated fats interfere with dopamine uptake in the brain. So it makes sense as to why keto would be effective for schizophrenia, because schizophrenia is a disorder characterized by an overabundance of dopamine in the brain. So we were just talking about Parkinson's, where there's a lack of. Schizophrenia is an overabundance. So for them, something super low carb that's going to interfere with dopamine uptake might be helpful. But if someone's struggling with depression, in theory, we want to be getting more of that. Obviously, people are complex. They can have a lot of different things going on with them. But in theory, carbohydrates should help with dopamine activity. And a really good example of this is women who struggle with PMS and PMDD. Who here is familiar with PMDD or what that even means? Hand raise, anyone? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And it's basically, people describe it as severe PMS. Basically women who have like suicidal attempts and a lot of mood swings. What's interesting about PMDD is it's not like women with PMDD don't have hormonal imbalances that are different from other women. They have a brain chemistry sensitivity to normal hormonal shifts. So basically, it's characterized as a mental health disorder and treated with SSRIs for that reason. And what we know about the research on women with PMDD or just PMS symptoms is that their symptoms are heightened during tryptophan depletion, which means that when they do not have enough tryptophan in their cycles, they have heightened symptoms, mood swings, and carbs help tryptophan cross the blood-brain barrier, right? So I know so many women that are always like, I need carbs for my mood. Like I get angry and irritable if I don't have them. And like, this is why, like there's a reason why we crave them and want them. And they also are involved in progesterone production. But, I've seen over time that when women are in the second half of their cycle or premenstrual, it can be really helpful to make sure that they're getting, once again, low glycemic, whole foods, slow burning carbohydrates to make sure that they're getting enough tryptophan to the brain. Okay. So carbs are going to vary person to person. If you got to prioritize things. So that's why it's such a personalized thing. If someone's diabetic, then maybe the best approach is a low carb diet. And that's going to be the most important thing because that's causing so much inflammation in the brain when you're a diabetic. If you have someone who has a lot of PMS, they're a young woman, taking carbohydrates away from them is probably not going to help. It's probably going to make things worse. So it just depends upon the person. Okay. So I want to just go over some overall dietary takeaways because we just talked about a lot of like nutritional things. What does this actually mean when we look at diets and everything? Obviously, there are many popular diets that would improve a good foundational intake of the nutrients needed to support neurotransmitter synthesis. This could be like Mediterranean. This could be like a paleo diet. This could be like an anti-inflammatory diet. A specific diet is not required. What's required is that we get an adequate intake of the following nutrients. We get enough protein. We get enough omega-3 fats. I put seafood because we need to get that direct source. So that, or supplement with algae. Whole vegetables, so leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, whole fruit, citrus fruits, berries, capsaicin. These are all things that have compounds that boost your mood. Nuts and seeds, they're such good sources of these minerals that we need. Legumes, and then the low glycemic carbohydrates. So I put examples of this. This could be if someone's on like a paleo-ish diet, this could be like root vegetables. If someone does fine with grains, then this could be whole grains or gluten-free grains or what have you. And then bioflavonoids, which I have a specific slide on that. We'll go over that. So these are my favorite mood boosting foods, if I had to choose them. So these are foods where I like to take things and think like, well, what does this actually mean in life daily for people? And the thing is like, well, if we could get people struggling with depression or what have you to make some of these foods their dietary staple, then they're going to be getting a higher supply of a lot of these nutrients we're discussing. So I talked about pumpkin seeds. I eat pumpkin seeds like every single day. I also eat chocolate every single day. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about why each of these foods are my top mood boosting foods, but here they are. So pumpkin seeds, they're high in tryptophan. They're high in tyrosine. They're high in magnesium, zinc, iron. They were like a, I don't know, a quadruple, whatever, whammy of all of these nutrients. Chocolate. Chocolate contains phenylethylamine, which is a nootropic that acts as a neurotransmitter, like I was talking about early on. And this is the same nootropic that is released during the process of like falling in love. So it's a very popular nootropic. And so like I always say that I'm pretty anxiously attached to my chocolate. And I think I am. I eat chocolate every single afternoon. So I'm joking, but like I'm not joking. So chocolate is a great mood boosting food. Citrus fruit. So citrus fruit has vitamin C and bioflavonoids. Berries have vitamin C and bioflavonoids. Chickpeas are just the highest dietary source of B6. Oysters, I love oysters because they're high in, I love any fatty fish, but there are certain foods like oysters, they're really high in not just omega-3 fats, but they're our highest dietary source of zinc. So we're getting like a zinc boost. And then beef liver, you saw beef liver on here multiple times. I can't deny that it's just a nutrient powerhouse that has all of these things in it. Sardines, I love sardines because they have omega-3 fats. They also have a pretty significant vitamin D. As long as you're getting the ones that have the bones, you don't want the boneless sardines. It kind of defeats the purpose. The ones with the bones have all the minerals still, like the vitamin D and the calcium. And it's a really great way to get those nutrients if someone doesn't eat like dairy or something like that. So those are the mood boosting foods. I mentioned bioflavonoids. This would be a whole separate presentation. I do have a whole separate presentation on bioflavonoids. And bioflavonoids are naturally occurring polyphenols. So they're compounds that we get through certain plant-based foods. So when people talk about like antioxidants and things like that, that's a specific type of bioflavonoid. And flavonoids have several different antidepressant properties. And so when you go back to some of these foods here, like citrus fruit, berries, they're high in bioflavonoids. Chocolate is high in bioflavonoids. I have a whole guide on bioflavonoids. You can download it if you can't actually click the link on these slides. If you go to my Instagram or YouTube, my link in bio on both of those, there's a link to download a mood boosting food guide. It's a bioflavonoids for depression blueprint. Basically, these compounds have several actions that are antidepressant-like, similarly to SSRIs, essentially. So basically, they're natural MAO enzyme inhibitors, which I mentioned earlier. MAO is that enzyme that clears out neurotransmitters from the brain, but they don't have the same side effects as SSRIs. And then they enhance BDNF expression, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that helps with neuroplasticity and basically those like establishing new neural pathways in the brain. So examples of flavonoids, if you're like, what is a flavonoid? This would be things like quercetin, right? That we're all familiar with. So quercetin is a flavonoid. You would get this in onions and garlic. Hesperidin is in citrus fruits, camphorails, and leafy greens. So I have a guide that goes over like we did today, what are the flavonoids, and then what foods will you actually find these in. So that's the presentation. I'm like right on time for us to dive into some other things, but you can connect with me. I spend most of my time on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that's specifically focused all on nutritional interventions for mental health. So I talk about depression, anxiety, and PMS and PMDD. So I have educational content on so many things. So if that's something that interests you, please check that out. And wherever you find me there or on Instagram, you can use the link to download any of my like free guides and stuff that we went over today. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or I have a few minutes. So if anyone just wants to chat about anything, like you're welcome to hang out for a few minutes. And if you got to go, you got to go. So thanks
Yes,
for being here.
that was wonderful. Could you unshare your slides?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And just a point of reference, I'm not letting people in at the waiting room now because I suspect someone's trying to bother us. So they can sit in the waiting room until we're done. But, you know, that was one of the most clear and right on talks I've heard in a long time. It's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank
Yeah,
you.
truly. So friends, if you want to just, you know, unmute and say, you know, ask your question, make your comment, or
Oh yeah,
use
there's
the
lots
chat.
of questions in the chat, so I
Right.
can look at these. Let's see. There's a few in the chat. Does chicken liver have? That's a good question. Does chicken liver have any of the benefits of beef liver? It has a lot, but
Yes.
it's slightly different. So chicken liver, you know what chicken liver is the best source of is iron, actually. So chicken liver is great for young children in Canada. It's actually like one of the first foods that they give children for that reason, like liver pate. And children actually tend to love the taste of chicken liver because they need all those nutrients, right? And for people who are iron deficient, I see this in practice a lot. If you are iron deficient, you'll like the taste of chicken liver. And then when you're not anymore, you'll be like, I don't want this anymore. So chicken liver is a higher source of iron. Beef liver is a higher source of folate, okay? So they'll have a lot of nutrients, but beef liver does have way more things than chicken liver. What supplements would you suggest are best? Will someone clarify for what they were referring to on that? Was it like a specific nutrient? Was it something that I was talking about specifically? Because that could mean a lot of things. So, does the dairy and block the absorption of iron? So dairy and iron, calcium and iron, yes, it's not what people think. It's not as if like you're not going to get any iron when you consume these things together. But let's say that someone is iron deficient. I will generally ask them to not have dairy with their other foods. So if you're just like a normal person, you'll likely get enough iron. But if you're anemic, then it can be really helpful to separate out those things, specifically milk. What specifically would you suggest for PMDD? Would it be more foods like pumpkin seeds and chocolate all month long? Yes, chocolate every day. Yeah, pumpkin seeds. I think you could eat those all month long. For PMDD, I have specific videos on YouTube about PMDD. You should watch them. I posted one this week about supplements for PMDD, and this is about supplements. But the reason why I bring this up is because I suggest starting it the second half of your cycle, so post-ovulation, because this is when there's not enough studies on this. I want them to do more. There's like one that looks about how nutrient levels fluctuate over the menstrual cycle. And it's the second half of the cycle where nutrient levels like the tryptophan, magnesium decrease. So you might not need more the first half, but if you're experiencing, I would say like when you're experiencing those symptoms, whatever those are, that's when I would have more of these things. Any suggestions for reading your awesome channel? Any suggestions for reading materials, books, websites? Besides your awesome YouTube channel, I would provide this info as well. That's a good question. I've learned from so many different things. Like, I don't even know. There's several great books on neurotransmitters, methylation. William Walsh has a great book.
I like William Walsh.
Yeah, he's great.
He's derivative of Carl Pfeiffer.
Mm-hmm.
So the Carl Pfeiffer Institute is very reliable. I think there's a lot of kind of misinformation out there. So when you Google and you see things, a lot of it is somewhat superficial and supplement, you know, let's buy these supplements. So the smart move is to work with a practitioner like Jess, myself, or others who can really kind of guide people in a particular way, because everyone's different time and space. And then many people are on medication.
Yeah.
And so medication's a whole nother conversation of how do you strengthen and stabilize a person who at one point in their life was very depleted. And at one point in their life was very overwhelmed. And at one point in their life lost balance. And then they got treated medically. And doctors are very remiss about reviewing and modifying or releasing treatment. So again, those are things, but the dietary foods that we've looked at are foods we can all eat, and we can all eat more of. And then the herbs and supplements we can also take, but some level of guidance is the smartest thing, rather than just buying, some formulas. But nevertheless, it's, the nutritional depletion, exhaustion, irritation that goes with mood disorder is profound, and drugs do not account for that at all. In some cases, they worsen it, because drugs deplete folic acid, drugs deplete magnesium, drugs deplete various kinds of cofactors and so forth. So, building the natural is always useful here.
Yeah, so the reason why I like, we were just talking about him and I already forgot his name. Is because he does a lot of research on psychiatric drugs.
That's right.
And the thing about psychiatric drugs is they're doing more of this now, which is super fascinating, but there's certain ones that, like, you give it to the wrong person, makes them suicidal. And this all has to do with methylation.
That's right.
And it just goes to show that it is a very personalized thing, right? And so when it comes to all of that, like, yeah, learning more about, I like him. I like Dr. Ben Lynch is great for nutritional genomics and understanding some of that stuff. What would you?
Can you explain methylation in 50 words or less for those?
No, I wish.
It's hard. It's hard. Methylation's hard to explain, but it's basically the liver conversion of amino acids. Okay. Yeah. So you can eat food and the liver can convert it properly, or it can create byproducts that are problematic. And some people have methylation defects. It's genetic, or sometimes methylation worsens over time.
Yeah, methylation, I also have a video on this, and I tried really hard to be able to explain it in like 40. It's so hard. It's so hard. And then people are like, it still doesn't make sense. I'm like, I know. There was one question I wanted to ask or answer. Is there any dietary supplements for low libido? Is that considered a mental health issue? Low libido, the thing about this is there are so many things that can go into this. There's hormones, there's that's a good question. Is it considered a mental health issue? I've watched a lot of great podcasts that go into this, especially the relationship between like men and women, and how we are responders versus, something else. And basically there's a lot of factors that go into like having a low libido. So, I mean, I guess it could be dietary recommendations for that. I would say following something like we just went over would be a great place to start, right? Yeah. Like something that's really high in phytochemicals and nutrients. I talked about beets, things like nitric oxide that increase blood flow, and mood boosting foods that are going to make you feel better. That really is a good place to start. So good question. Supplementing vitamin C, better to get a food source. I always get this question about absorbic acid. It doesn't matter. Vitamin C, yeah, get it from food, get it from absorbic acid. Absorbic acid is absorbic acid. The slides that I showed you from the Linus Pauling Institute, they do all of this. They've done all of this research on vitamin C and have proven that all these different forms that are like this liposomal acerola cherry that people all claim on supplements are more bioavailable, they're not. Like absorbic acid, it's the same as absorbic acid. So don't really have the cheaper one. It's fine. Obviously you don't want like GMO stuff, but like, yeah,
I think that's a real consideration.
Yeah.
Ascorbic acid's made out of corn.
Exactly. Yeah.
And corn is often, genetically modified, and ascorbic acid could be made, it's like high fructose corn syrup is, it's a danger. So I guess, again, I prefer food source, but if you're going into different levels, you can't get it from a food source.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, I tell people have juices, because juice you'll concentrate. And I tell people with mood disorder that's based on depletion, because libido is a depletion issue. Depression is a depletion issue. People who get older and weaker are depleted. Eating animal protein can actually make a tremendous difference, where 35 supplements didn't work.
Mhm.
You know, the macronutrients with some enzymatic and herbal support can really shift. And I've had people who are on one diet versus the other, and the limitations in a diet over time actually created various imbalances and so forth. So,
Yeah.
you know, this talk is important because it lays good foundation, and it reminds us that these are foods we like to eat. And when people are unhappy, they don't eat well. So of course, there's plenty of reasons to be unhappy. There's
Mhm.
lots of stress and trauma and all that. And you go, well, heck with it. You know, I'll just smoke, drink, take drugs and not eat well. But then it deepens the debt that they've created over time. And as
Mhm.
people start to re-nutrify, they feel better. And it's better to do it on a gradual process rather than throw a certain kind of concentrate at a problem and think it might work. It might, but oftentimes it doesn't because there's just too many foundational deficiencies there.
Well, to go off of that, I think a good way to look at it is I like to start with foundations,
Yeah.
right? And then there are certain circumstances based upon genetics and all these things where someone might need a higher intake of certain things.
Yes.
But it's like you don't know that unless you start with the foundations first and get those covered. So, other questions, told that beef liver was too high in copper. So that's for people that have Wilson's disease.
Mhm.
So if you have Wilson's disease, that's a rare genetic disorder where, you know, it's problematic to have copper that's too high. And then basically some mood disorders actually can be aggravated by getting too much copper, also very personalized and genetic. So it's not an issue for the majority of the population if you're eating it in whole foods form. If you're taking mega doses of desiccated beef liver, then you can look at that the same way as mega doses of a supplement,
I don't even know.
Megan, please mute.
which could also cause issues. When we mega dose, any nutrient can cause issues. So the recommendation with beef liver is like a serving a week,
Yeah,
essentially.
exactly. It's not like pumpkin seeds. You can eat pumpkin seeds every day.
Yeah, and so
People
with
don't
beef
eat liver
liver,
every day.
I took capsules of it for a while and then I stopped, you know, so if there's a reason, cool. If you cook potatoes, does it deplete vitamin C? If you cook, so vitamin C is a water soluble nutrient. So when you cook water soluble nutrients, vitamin C and B vitamins, it will always deplete the vitamin C. It doesn't mean that it's going to get rid of all of it, but it will deplete it. Or significantly reduce the availability of it. But when people then, I want to make this clear too, because then people think that raw foods are better. That's not true because we get certain nutrients when we cook foods. So that's why it's helpful to have both raw and cooked foods in the diet. How can someone use nutrition to reduce medications for depression? So I think that goes back to starting with the foundations and just making sure that you're like, you have all the things in play that I just went over. You're doing all of those things. And then you go see someone, because I never recommend that people come off of psychiatric medications on their own. You should have someone that's helping you transition off of that. The reason why people aren't successful is because they don't have a transition plan. They're not supporting the right pathways that your brain has gotten used to with these certain medications. So that's something where like if someone was coming to me for that or someone else, it's like, it would spend like 3 to 6 months getting those nutritional foundations in play. And then there would be a different strategy developed with that person. So start with the foundations and then have someone help you with that. And I think that was my last question. Does anyone, oh wait, no. Some of these foods listed are high in oxalates. Is that something you pay attention to? Oxalates, another thing. Let me say something, people. If we avoided all of the things that were problematic in foods, we would have nothing left to eat, okay? So if you have a reason to avoid high oxalates, like you are really prone to kidney stones, then you might not want to eat just high oxalate foods all day. But even for people who are, What I see is that it's just important to make sure that they're not just eating those foods. It's not generally a problem if they have those foods in their diet. So it's not really something that I pay attention to, no,
Let me
unless
say
someone
this.
needs to.
The body talks to us all the time.
Mhm.
So if we're doing something and perhaps we're overdoing something, we'll get the feedback.
Mhm.
And when we get the feedback, we go, okay, time to modify, time to back off a little bit.
What I will say is I
Yeah.
don't recommend that people like juice foods like this, like even beet juice, foods that are really high in oxalates, stuff like that, because then you're compounding that a lot. And then that might be problematic for someone who has one of those conditions or something
right.
like that. So yeah. And I
But
think
you'll find out if you do it and you start getting pains, you go, well, that didn't work for whatever reason. But I think many people overgeneralize, and it's about concentration.
Yeah.
So it's really about, what seems to work and how can you build up your program in a way that provides support across multiple platforms, and also look at the emotional eating considerations. And if you're feeling emotional or you're feeling unhappy, eat better. Rather than the reverse of like, oh, I don't care.
Yeah, and
But
if we're talking about depression, I want to
Yeah.
just throw out there that basically more so than food, and I'm a nutritionist, the number one thing that is shown to be helpful is actually exercise, because all the things that I was just talking about, so it's really still important that we have the nutrients foundation, but then exercise actually gets these things moving, like the dopamine, the nitric oxide, things like that. So if you can do a combination of like making sure that you're exercising and eating good foods, that's a really good foundation to layer. So
wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you, Jess. I think
You're
we'll
so
give
welcome.
it a big wrap. And can we all give Jess some love and appreciation?
I got some fireworks earlier. Those were fun.